Hello everyone and welcome. Now if you're American, you've likely grown up with a certain narrative baked into your very being, right alongside an inexplicable love for cheese in a can. It's the idea that America is, quite simply, number one. We chant it at sporting events, we slap it on bumper stickers, and our politicians repeat it so often you'd think they were trying to summon a bald eagle with a mortgage. But what if we paused the fireworks and the flyovers for just a moment? What if we actually looked at the data? Tonight, let's take a closer look at how America really stacks up against the rest of the world. It's time to move beyond the patriotic platitudes and dive into the cold, hard, and often deeply inconvenient facts. We're going to be examining a whole host of key statistics and facts, comparing the US not to developing nations, but to our peers, other wealthy, developed countries that we like to think we're leading. We'll look at everything from health and wealth to freedom and safety. Think of it as an international performance review, and America has just been called into the head office, sweating profusely and hoping nobody brings up that time it tried to deep fry a stick of butter. This isn't about hating America, it's about understanding it. Because you can't fix a problem if you refuse to admit it exists in the first place, no matter how loudly you shout USA at it. So get comfortable and perhaps pour yourself a stiff drink. You might need it, because what follows might be a little jarring, a bit uncomfortable, and may challenge some long-held beliefs. This is not a feel-good highlight reel. Instead, here are 12 reasons Americans might want to think twice before boasting about being number one. Let's begin. Right, let's start with something cheerful. Cancer. Specifically our rates of it. Americans often take for granted that we have the best medical technology in the world, the most brilliant doctors, the most advanced treatments. And while we do have pockets of incredible medical excellence, the overall picture is, to put it mildly, a bit grim. When you look at the incidence rates for all cancers combined, the United States finds itself uncomfortably high up the leaderboard. We're not at the very top, thank heavens. That dubious honor often goes to countries like Australia and New Zealand, largely due to skin cancer. But we are firmly and distressingly in the top tier of developed nations. According to the World Cancer Research Fund, the US has one of the highest cancer rates in the world. We're talking about being in the same league as Denmark, France, and the Netherlands. For a country that spends an astronomical amount on healthcare, more on that later, believe me, you'd expect us to be, well, healthier. You'd expect preventative care and public health initiatives to put a significant dent in these figures. But the reality is that many Americans face barriers to the very screenings and lifestyle support that could prevent cancer from developing in the first place. This isn't just about one or two specific types of cancer either. While rates for some cancers like lung cancer have thankfully decreased due to public health campaigns against smoking, others like colorectal, breast, and prostate cancer keep our numbers stubbornly high. It's a sobering thought. We have the innovation, we have the research, but our system seems to be failing at the fundamental task of keeping large swaths of our population from getting one of the most dreaded diseases on the planet. It points to a fundamental disconnect. We celebrate the miracle cure for the 1 in a million case, which is fantastic, but we seem to be failing at the less glamorous but arguably more important job of broad-scale public health. It's like owning a state-of-the-art fire engine but living in a city made of kindling and oily rags. You might be great at putting out fires, but wouldn't it be better if you stopped them from starting so frequently? The high cancer rate is the first crack in the facade of American exceptionalism. It suggests that just because you have the most expensive and technologically advanced system, it doesn't automatically translate to the best outcomes for the population as a whole. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and unfortunately, as we'll see, it's far from the only one we'll have to contend with tonight. Alright, from one cheery topic to another, let's talk about babies. Specifically, the chances of a baby born in the United States surviving its first year of life. This is the infant mortality rate, and it is one of the most basic and revealing indicators of a nation's health. It tells you about maternal health, access to prenatal and postnatal care, nutrition, and the overall strength of a country's social safety net. And America's report card here is, frankly, shameful. We are, and there is no gentle way to put this, shockingly bad at keeping our babies alive compared to other wealthy nations. The United States has the highest infant mortality rate among comparable developed countries. I want you to let that sink in. We're not being compared to war-torn nations or countries with developing economies. We are being measured against our peers, Canada, the UK, Germany, Japan, Australia, and we are losing, badly. According to the CDC and international health organizations, for every 1,000 babies born in the US, more will die before their first birthday than in any of those other countries. In some cases, our rate is nearly double that of a country like Finland or Japan. So, why is this happening? It's a complex mess of factors. A huge part of it is the lack of universal access to quality prenatal care. Many women, particularly in low-income and rural areas, don't get the consistent medical checkups they need during pregnancy. Then there's the issue of preterm births, which are significantly more common in the US and are a leading cause of infant death. Add to that the socioeconomic disparities that are just chasms in America. Infant mortality rates for black infants are more than double those for white infants, a horrifying statistic that lays bare the systemic inequities in our healthcare system. It's an absolute tragedy. We are a country that will argue endlessly about when life begins, yet we seem utterly unwilling to invest in the systems that would ensure that life, once it has begun, gets a fair chance to continue. We have neonatal intensive care units that can perform miracles, saving babies born incredibly prematurely. We are brilliant at the dramatic last-ditch intervention, but we are failing at the simple, foundational stuff, making sure every expectant mother has support, nutrition, and medical care from day one. Think about it, the infant mortality rate is a reflection of how a society cares for its most vulnerable, and our reflection is not a flattering one. It shows a system that is fractured, unequal, and leaving far too many families to grieve an unimaginable loss. To be number one in this category is a national disgrace, and it is something no amount of patriotic bluster can ever excuse. So, if you survive a statistically more perilous infancy, what's next? Well, you get to live a shorter life than your counterparts in other rich countries. Yes, that's right. Despite spending more on healthcare per person than any other nation on Earth, by a staggering margin, Americans are dying younger than people in dozens of other countries. Life expectancy in the US has been stagnating, and even declining in recent years, a trend that is almost unheard of in the developed world, outside of major wars or societal collapse. This isn't a minor dip, it's a flashing red warning light on the nation's dashboard. When you look at the rankings, the US sits well below not just the obvious contenders like Japan and Switzerland, but also below countries like Spain, Italy, South Korea, and Canada. The average American can expect to live several years less than someone born in those countries. This gap has been widening for decades. While other nations have made steady gains, the US has been treading water and in some cases sinking. We are living shorter, more brutal lives, and we're paying a premium for the privilege. What's killing us? It's a grim cocktail of factors that researchers have called deaths of despair. We have a catastrophic opioid epidemic that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. We have shockingly high rates of gun violence, which snuffs out lives at a rate unthinkable in any other developed nation. And we have a high prevalence of chronic diseases linked to lifestyle and diet, like heart disease and diabetes, which are often poorly managed due to the high cost and inaccessibility of consistent care. Our system is designed for expensive procedures, not for helping someone manage their diabetes for 30 years. This isn't just about healthcare either. It's about the fabric of society. Higher levels of stress, greater income inequality, weaker social safety nets, and car-dependent lifestyles all contribute to poorer health outcomes. We've engineered a society that is, in many ways, fundamentally unhealthy. We work longer hours, take less vacation, and carry more debt than people in most other wealthy countries. It turns out that living in a constant state of low-grade panic is not, in fact, good for your long-term health. Who knew? So, the American deal seems to be this: you'll pay more for your health care, you'll have a higher chance of dying in infancy, and if you make it through that, your reward is a shorter life expectancy than someone in Slovenia. It's a terrible deal. It's like buying the most expensive car on the lot, only to find out it breaks down constantly and has no seatbelts. Being number one in healthcare spending should mean being number one in health outcomes. The fact that we are so far from that is a profound indictment of our priorities. The land of the free. It's right there in our national anthem. Freedom is America's brand, our core identity. We export it, we fight wars over it, and we talk about it incessantly. But how free are we really? When you move beyond the rhetoric and look at how freedom is measured globally, the picture becomes a lot more complicated. Organizations like the Cato Institute and the Fraser Institute publish an annual Human Freedom Index. which ranks countries based on a broad range of personal, civil, and economic freedoms. And America's position on that index might surprise you. We're not number 1. We're not even in the top 10. For years, the United States has been sitting outside the top tier of free countries, currently ranking around 17th, tied with the United Kingdom and Japan. We're trailing behind countries like Switzerland, New Zealand, Denmark, Estonia, and Canada. So while we are certainly a very free country in the grand scheme of things, we are demonstrably less free in certain key areas than many of our peers. The undisputed champion of freedom narrative is simply not supported by the data. Where are we falling short? Well, the index looks at things like the rule of law, security and safety, freedom of expression, and regulation. America's score has been dragged down by a few key factors. One major one is our legal system and property rights, where issues like civil asset forfeiture, where police can seize your property without even charging you with a crime, are a significant concern. Another is our world-leading incarceration rate. It's hard to call yourself the land of the free when you lock up a higher percentage of your own citizens than any other country on the planet. Furthermore, our security and safety score is, to put it mildly, abysmal for a developed nation. This is driven almost entirely by our homicide and violent crime rates, which are orders of magnitude higher than in most of Western Europe or East Asia. The freedom to live without a constant, low-level fear of violence is a freedom that many Americans simply do not have compared to their international counterparts. And then there's the increasing polarization and erosion of trust in institutions, which threatens the very foundations of a free and open society. So yes, Americans enjoy immense freedoms. Freedom of speech, religion, and assembly are deeply enshrined, even if they are constantly being tested. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Our claims to be the global paragon of liberty are undermined by a punitive justice system, a level of violence that is an international outlier, and an erosion of trust in the rule of law. Freedom isn't just a flag, it's a practice. And in some areas, other countries are simply practicing it better than we are. Let's talk about money. Specifically the cost of keeping a roof over your head and food on your table. The American dream is built on the promise of prosperity, the idea that with hard work, you can build a good life for yourself and your family. But for millions, that dream is being crushed under the weight of an ever-increasing cost of living. Major American cities are now among the most expensive places to live in the entire world, often outstripping their international counterparts in Europe and Asia, but without many of the public services that make high costs bearable elsewhere. Take a look at global cost of living surveys. Cities like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles consistently rank among the priciest on the planet. The problem is that while rents in Manhattan might be comparable to those in central London or Tokyo, the salaries for average workers have not kept pace. And crucially, the social infrastructure is vastly different. In a city like Paris or Vienna, high taxes might contribute to a high cost of living, but they also pay for world-class public transit, subsidized childcare, and universal healthcare, which dramatically reduces a family's out-of-pocket expenses. In the United States, you get the high costs without the corresponding benefits. You pay a fortune in rent, and then you also have to pay for a car because the public transport is unreliable or non-existent. You pay for expensive health insurance. You pay for childcare that costs more than a year of college tuition. You are essentially being charged luxury European prices for a system with a fraction of the amenities. It is the worst of all worlds. It's like paying for a 5-star hotel and being told the pool is closed, the air conditioning is broken, and you have to cook your own breakfast. This isn't just a big city problem either. The affordability crisis is spreading across the country. Housing costs in particular have become completely untethered from local wages in countless smaller cities and suburban areas. This puts an immense strain on families, forcing them into long commutes, precarious debt, and the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. The starter home is becoming an endangered species, a mythical creature spoken of only by aging baby boomers. The result is a country where the basic building blocks of a stable life, housing, healthcare, education, are becoming luxury goods. The American system is increasingly forcing its citizens to choose between financial ruin and foregoing essentials. This is not a sustainable model. A society where a huge portion of the population is just one medical bill or one missed paycheck away from disaster is not a healthy society. And it is certainly not the land of opportunity it claims to be. So, you've survived a risky infancy, lived a shorter, more expensive life, and now you're approaching what are supposed to be your golden years. Retirement. The time to relax, travel, and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Except for a terrifyingly large number of Americans, that's a complete fantasy. The chances of having a secure, comfortable retirement in the United States are dwindling fast. America is facing a retirement crisis of staggering proportions, and we are handling it far worse than most other developed nations. Look at global retirement security indexes. The United States consistently fails to crack the top tier. We lag behind countries like Iceland, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Australia. These countries have robust, multi-pillared retirement systems that combine government pensions, mandatory employer contributions, and private savings. They have built systems designed to ensure a basic level of dignity in old age. The American system, by contrast, can best be described as, "You're on your own, good luck." Our system is a rickety three-legged stool. The first leg, Social Security, was never designed to be a sole source of income, and its future is a constant political football. The second leg, employer-sponsored pensions, has all but vanished from the private sector, replaced by the 401k. And the 401k, the third leg, has proven to be a deeply flawed and unequal vehicle for retirement savings. It places the entire burden of saving and investing on the individual, many of whom lack the financial literacy, the disposable income, or the access to a plan in the first place. The result is a disaster. Tens of millions of Americans have zero, and I mean $0 saved for retirement. Even among those who are saving, the median 401k balance is nowhere near enough to sustain a decent standard of living for 2 or 3 decades. We are creating a future where millions of our elderly will face poverty, forced to work until they physically can't, or rely on their children, who are themselves struggling with their own economic pressures. It's a generational catastrophe in slow motion. This is a uniquely American problem among wealthy nations. In other countries, there's a societal understanding that providing a safety net for the elderly is a collective responsibility. In the United States, we've embraced a radical individualism that sounds great in a campaign speech, but translates into widespread fear and precarity for our senior citizens. The American dream of a comfortable retirement is, for many, just that, a dream, and they are about to get a very rude awakening. We've touched on this already, but honestly, it deserves its own special chapter of horrors American healthcare. It is, by any sane measure, a complete and utter paradox. We spend more, so much more, than anyone else. If the American healthcare system were a person, it would be someone who buys a solid gold Lamborghini, but can't afford gas or insurance and has to push it everywhere. Per capita, the United States spends over twice the average of other wealthy countries. And what do we get for all that money? As we've seen, higher infant mortality, lower life expectancy, and worse outcomes for many chronic diseases. The defining feature of the US system is its cost, which acts as a barrier to care. In countries with universal systems, like Canada, the UK, France, or Germany, healthcare is treated as a public good. You get sick, you see a doctor. Cost is not the primary consideration. In the US, a medical diagnosis is often followed by a second, equally terrifying financial diagnosis. People delay going to the doctor, they skip filling prescriptions, they avoid calling an ambulance, all because they are terrified of the bill. This leads to worse health outcomes and, ironically, higher costs down the line when a manageable condition becomes a catastrophic emergency. Let's be clear about what this means in practice. A simple ER visit can cost thousands of dollars. Childbirth can cost tens of thousands. A major surgery or cancer treatment can lead to financial ruin and bankruptcy, something that is virtually unheard of in any other developed nation. We are the only wealthy country where medical debt is a common and devastating problem. We have tied a person's access to life-saving care to their employment status and their ability to navigate a bewilderingly complex and predatory insurance market. The system is a labyrinth of private insurers, for-profit hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies who are free to charge whatever they want. An MRI costs a few $100s in Japan or France. In the US, it can be thousands. A vial of insulin costs a few dollars to produce, but its list price in America is hundreds of dollars, leading to people rationing a drug they need to live. It is a system that is brilliantly designed to extract maximum profit and only incidentally designed to provide health. So when Americans boast about having the best healthcare in the world, what they usually mean is that if you are fantastically wealthy and have a rare, interesting disease, you can get incredible, cutting-edge treatment. But a healthcare system shouldn't be judged by how it treats its millionaires. It should be judged by how it treats a diabetic bus driver or a pregnant cashier. And by that measure, The American system is an expensive, inefficient, and often cruel failure. Let's move on to education. A well-educated populace is the bedrock of a modern economy and a functioning democracy. And for decades, the US was the undisputed leader in public education. We invented the modern high school, but that lead has long since vanished. When you look at international rankings today, like the PISA scores which test 15-year-olds in math, science, and reading, the United States is relentlessly, depressingly average. We are stuck in the middle of the pack, far behind top performers like Singapore, Finland, Estonia, and Canada. For a country of our wealth and influence, being average is a massive failure. Our scores in math are particularly poor, consistently below the OECD average. This isn't just about bragging rights, it has real-world consequences. A workforce that is less skilled in mathematics and science is less prepared for the high-tech jobs of the future. We are essentially failing to equip our children with the fundamental skills they need to compete in a global economy. The problem, as with so many things in America, is one of profound inequality. The US does have some of the best schools and universities in the world. If you live in a wealthy suburban district, your local public school might be fantastic, but just a few miles away, in a poorer urban or rural district, the schools can be chronically underfunded, with crumbling infrastructure, overcrowded classrooms, and overworked teachers. We have tied school funding to local property taxes, a system that bakes inequality directly into the educational structure. It creates a vicious cycle of poverty and poor educational outcomes. This stands in stark contrast to many top-performing countries, where education funding is distributed more equitably on a national level to ensure that every child, regardless of their parents' income or zip code, has access to a quality education. They understand that a child's potential shouldn't be determined by the wealth of their immediate neighbors. In America, we seem to have accepted a system where a child's future is largely determined by the lottery of their birth. So while we have elite universities that attract the best and brightest from around the globe, our foundational K-12 system is sputtering. We are producing a handful of world-class students and a vast sea of mediocrity. This is not a recipe for long-term success, it's a recipe for a society with ever-widening gaps between the haves and the have-nots. A society that is squandering the potential of millions of its own children. Alright, let's get personal. Let's talk about love, marriage, and the messy end of it all. The United States has a reputation for having a high divorce rate, and for once, the reputation is pretty much spot on. While our divorce rate has actually been declining from its peak in the 1980s, we still remain a world leader in marital dissolution. When you compare the US to other developed countries, particularly in Western Europe and East Asia, Americans are significantly more likely to get divorced. According to UN data and other demographic studies, the US crude divorce rate, the number of divorces per 1,000 people, is consistently among the highest in the Western world. We have a higher rate than the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Japan. In fact, some studies suggest that nearly half of all marriages in the US will end in divorce, a figure that is often debated, but points to a culture of marital instability that is an international outlier. We seem to be as good at ending marriages as we are at starting them. So, why are Americans so quick to untie the knot? There isn't one simple answer. Part of it is cultural. American individualism places a huge emphasis on personal happiness and fulfillment, which can lead people to leave a marriage that they feel is no longer meeting their needs. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. No one is advocating for trapping people in miserable situations, but it does contribute to higher churn. There's also less social and religious stigma attached to divorce in the US compared to more traditional societies. But economic factors play a massive role as well. The financial strain that we've already discussed, the high cost of living, stagnant wages and debt, is a huge source of marital conflict. Money problems are consistently cited as a leading cause of divorce. When couples are under constant financial pressure, it erodes the very foundation of their relationship. The American economic model isn't just bad for your health and retirement, it's apparently bad for your love life too. So while we might idealize the white picket fence and the happily ever after, the reality on the ground is far messier. The American approach to marriage seems to be one of high hopes, high stress, and a high probability of calling a lawyer. It's another area where the idealized version of America clashes with the statistical reality. We are a nation of serial romantics perhaps, but also a nation of serial divorcees. Let's move from the heart to the stomach. Food. America is a land of abundance, with supermarkets the size of aircraft hangars filled with an incredible variety of food from around the world. But that abundance comes with a hidden and often disgusting risk: foodborne illness. The United States has a surprisingly high rate of people getting sick from contaminated food compared to many other developed nations, particularly those in the European Union. Our system for ensuring food safety is a complex, fragmented, and often ineffective patchwork that leaves consumers vulnerable. The CDC estimates that each year, about 1 in 6 Americans, that's 48 million people, get sick from foodborne diseases. 128,000 are hospitalized and 3,000 die. These are staggering numbers for a modern, wealthy country. The culprits are familiar names: Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria. They pop up in everything from leafy greens and cantaloupe to peanut butter and ground beef, leading to massive multi-state recalls that seem to happen with alarming regularity. You're more likely to see a recall alert on your local news than a story about city council. Why is this happening so often? Part of the problem is our fragmented regulatory system. Food safety is split between multiple agencies, primarily the FDA and the USDA, with overlapping jurisdictions and gaps in oversight. It's a bureaucratic mess. The European Union, by contrast, has a more integrated farm-to-fork approach with much stricter regulations on things like agricultural practices, animal welfare, and the use of antibiotics in livestock, the overuse of which in the US contributes to antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Furthermore, our food production system is highly centralized and industrialized. When contamination happens at one massive processing plant, it can quickly spread across the entire country, sickening thousands of people before the source is even identified. The sheer scale of American agriculture creates a scale of risk that is hard to manage. We've prioritized efficiency and low cost over safety and resilience, and we are paying the price with our health. So the next time you're in a US supermarket, marveling at the sheer volume of it all, remember that this system of abundance has a dark side. It's a system where you constantly have to worry if your spinach is going to send you to the hospital. In many other parts of the developed world, consumers have a much higher degree of confidence in the safety of their food supply. In America, eating a salad is sometimes a gamble. Let's talk about policing. This is, without question, one of the most contentious and painful topics in America today. The people who are meant to protect and serve are often viewed with fear and mistrust by large segments of the population, and for good reason. When you compare American policing to that in other developed democratic nations, a few stark and disturbing differences emerge. Our police are more violent, more militarized, and are involved in fatal encounters with the public at a rate that is completely off the charts. Let's start with training. In many European countries like Germany or Finland, becoming a police officer is a highly competitive process that requires years of training, often at a national police university, focusing on de-escalation, social sciences, and constitutional law. The average training period can be 2 to 3 years. In the United States, the average training period in a police academy is only about 21 weeks. We spend less time training our officers to make life or death decisions than a licensed cosmetologist spends learning how to do hair and nails. This lack of comprehensive training contributes to a warrior mindset, rather than a guardian mindset. Police are often trained to see the public as a potential threat, to dominate every encounter, and to resort to force quickly. This is compounded by the increasing militarization of police forces, thanks to federal programs that provide surplus military equipment, like armored vehicles and assault rifles, to local police departments. This blurs the line between a civilian police force and an occupying army, and it fundamentally changes the nature of police-community interactions. The results are tragic and predictable. American police kill more people in days than many other developed countries do in years. The rate of fatal police shootings in the US is astronomical compared to countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, or Japan, and these encounters disproportionately affect people of color, particularly Black Americans, who are killed by police at a much higher rate than white Americans, exposing the deep roots of systemic racism in our justice system. This is not to say that policing is an easy job, or that all officers are bad, but the system in which they operate is fundamentally flawed. We have undertrained, overarmed officers and have asked them to be the default solution to every social problem, from mental health crises to homelessness. It is a recipe for disaster. In other wealthy nations, they have invested in social services to handle social problems, and have invested in rigorous, lengthy training to ensure their police use force only as a last, desperate resort. In America, we've done the opposite. Finally, let's talk about the government itself. Trust in government in the United States is at a historic low. Many Americans feel that the system is rigged, that politicians don't represent them, and that the entire enterprise is riddled with corruption. And while the US doesn't typically rank alongside countries known for blatant bribery, our system has its own unique and perfectly legal forms of corruption that erode public trust and make us an outlier among developed nations. When you look at global corruption perception indexes, like the one from Transparency International, the US has been slipping. We're not at the bottom of the list, but we are far from the clean, transparent governance of countries like Denmark, New Zealand, and Finland. The perception both at home and abroad is that American politics is increasingly driven by money and special interests, not the public good. The core of the problem is the role of money in our politics. The system of campaign finance in the United States is, to put it politely, insane. The sheer amount of money required to run for office, the rise of super PACs that can spend unlimited sums to influence elections, and the revolving door between government service and lucrative lobbying jobs create a system where the wealthy and well-connected have vastly more influence than the average citizen. This isn't back-alley bribery. It's a sophisticated, legalized system of influence peddling that is corrupt in its effect, if not always in its legal definition. In many other developed countries, there are strict limits on campaign spending, public financing of elections, and tight regulations on lobbying. The goal is to level the playing field and ensure that political power is not simply for sale. In America, the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that spending money is a form of free speech, effectively opening the floodgates for special interest money to drown out the voices of ordinary citizens. It creates a government that is highly responsive to the needs of its donors, but often deaf to the needs of the public. This leads to policies that are wildly unpopular but serve powerful corporate interests, like tax cuts for the wealthy that balloon the deficit, or the inability to pass meaningful legislation on things like prescription drug prices or climate change. It breeds cynicism and apathy as people feel their vote doesn't matter against a tidal wave of cash. So, while we may not have politicians demanding suitcases of money, we have a far more insidious corruption that rots the very foundation of our democracy from within. So there you have it. 12 different ways in which America, the self-proclaimed greatest nation on earth, is falling short. From our health outcomes and life expectancy to our education system and the very stability of our democracy, the data paints a sobering picture. It's a picture of a nation with immense wealth and power that is failing to translate those advantages into a better quality of life for a huge portion of its citizens. So, while America has its strengths, and it certainly does, these statistics show there's a lot of room for improvement. It shows that chanting USA doesn't magically fix a broken healthcare system or a corrupt political one. This isn't about being unpatriotic. In fact, you could argue that true patriotism is not blind celebration but clear-eyed criticism. It's about loving your country enough to see its flaws and wanting to fix them. It's about having the courage to admit that maybe, just maybe, we don't have all the answers, and could learn a thing or two from how other countries handle healthcare, retirement, or policing. Maybe it's time to rethink what being number one really means. Does it mean having the most billionaires and the biggest military? Or does it mean having the longest life expectancy and the lowest infant mortality? The first step to solving any problem is admitting you have one. America has problems. These aren't small, insignificant issues. They are deep, systemic challenges that affect the lives and well-being of millions of people every single day. The path forward requires a dose of humility, a willingness to look at uncomfortable truths, and a commitment to demand better from our leaders and from ourselves. Because right now, the shocking truth is that in many of the ways that truly matter, America is not number one, and it's up to us to decide what we're going to do about that. Thank you for watching.